Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm also a partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. Joining me on the podcast today is one of my favorite repeat guests. Garry Golden is a futurist. You can find more information about him at his website at garrygolden.com. That's Garry with 2 R's. He's also the founder of Into the Future, which brings a lot of Garry's work with different corporate leaders and in the boardrooms, bringing that to young people in Brooklyn, New York. So if you have kids and you live in New York City and you're interested in some really cool programming around that, you should definitely check out intothefuture.nyc. Garry was good enough to set aside some time to talk about the future of energy, the future of crypto, and he really schooled me on AI, GPT, and why that's something I should really spend more time looking at, and probably you should spend more looking at too. So that was a very introductory part of the conversation at the end. I love talking to Garry because Garry is focused on the future. He's not focused on the next year or two. He's trying to see what's going to happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And he has a rigorous way of approaching that. I find that sometimes when you're really thinking seriously about the future, if you're doing it right, it's going to sound a little strange because you have to imagine what's really going to be different going forward. And that's what Garry does so well, and why he was generous enough to let me ask him some questions along that score and give some answers. So if you feel like the answers don't quite make sense, or if they're a little bit too pie in the sky, they're supposed to be. Futurists that get the future right, they're anticipating the pie in the sky thing that us mere mortals who are dealing with things like geopolitics on the day-to-day have trouble parsing through. So Garry, thank you so much for making the time. Listeners, my email address is jacob@cognitive.investments. If you want to talk about what we do at CI, some of our investment strategies, if you want to talk about how to access some of our research, if you want to tell me about what you had for breakfast this morning or a book that you think I should read, you can email me for all those reasons or any more that you could think of. So cheers, see you out there. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor. All right, Garry, it's nice to be with you. Garry, I didn't ask before we got on, where are you right now? This doesn't look like Brooklyn in the background.
So this is Brooklyn. It's just a different floor in our home. This is our rental unit. So
okay, well, the listeners can't see, but there's a lovely plate behind your head, and it's giving me life. Garry, we have so much to catch up on. We've talked crypto on this podcast before, hydrogen, a bunch of other things. So, we'll do, as you say, a potpourri of stuff. But I wanted to start off by asking you, maybe revisiting sort of the energy conversation in general. We've talked a little bit about hydrogen, although we can revisit that. I've been thinking a lot about biofuels lately, just in the context of, are soybeans about to have their ethanol moment? Is renewable diesel for real? You can sort of feel everyone in the United States casting about for an energy alternative. I don't know if you saw like all those oil executives at some conference last week that, of course, the Wall Street Journal and FT, everybody else had to cover, said, oh my God, we're at peak oil again in the United States and shale is going to decline. And it's like, God, how many times do we have to do that rigmarole? And we just had a fusion guy on the podcast too. And there's nice. Very interesting things happening with nuclear too. So where do you think we are with the energy landscape? Because I know that you think that hydrogen is eventually the solution that scales, but there's an awful lot of noise between now and then, and I have trouble parsing through all of it from a futurist perspective. So maybe help us get the lay of the land for where we're at with the energy transition and how you would give somebody some guardrails to understand all these developments that are happening.
Sure. So I think it's plausible that we're just at a stage of there's a lot of chaos and confusion, and everyone is being vocal about their self-interest and their strategy and path forward. So it's quite possible that very little will change, as typically happens in the industry. But it does feel like the geopolitics are shifting. It does feel like the kind of key technologies of using energy are changing. So we can kind of talk about, the heat combustion engine versus electric. I think a lot of it is just noise. I think a lot of it is just people seeing an opportunity, seeing confusion, and saying, our solution is the future. What that could mean is the next few years are a bit about diversification and, people trying to erode some market share with kind of the new thing. But I don't see anything in the short term, next 5 years outside of geopolitics in Europe, that are really going to fundamentally change the game. I think you still need to be looking at the 2030s and 2040s as a reordering of the energy mix and the energy pie.
That's a good dose of sobriety. It's interesting you say that about Europe. It was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because it seems like they're the ones with the crisis. The United States doesn't have a crisis. Like, those oil execs can say whatever they want. There's plenty of oil and natural gas in the United States. China and some of these other countries have problems too, but they don't have this antagonistic relationship with Russia, and Russia needs customers now. It's the Europeans who are so far, it's March 13th, 2023, we'll see where we're at next year, are so far saying we don't want to import any more Russian natural gas. We don't want to import any Russian oil. And that's kind of a difficult sort of thing to square if you want to have energy security. They made it through the last winter, but going forward, things are bad. Have you seen anything in Europe that makes you think the Europeans really are serious about pivoting to a hydrogen economy, or do you think that is also just talk? Because I feel like every other week, the European Commission has some other announcement about some hydrogen thing that they're doing.
So yeah, and I want to be clear here. I am a kind of a true believer when it comes to hydrogen. So listeners understand that I've got a lot of passion and personal reputation on this. But I do genuinely believe that hydrogen is the European story. It is the thing that solves the biggest list of their problems. So hydrogen can be used for kind of natural gas substitutes or blending with natural gas for industrial use cases. It can be used to meet the needs of transitioning into hydrogen electric trucks. So it just kind of pulls into past, present, and future as a solution, and they're absolutely serious to the point of the news that you're seeing is support for building out hydrogen pipeline infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So nobody is going to start laying down intracity or long distance pipelines without consensus that policy support and the market will be there for hydrogen. Within Europe, there are a couple, different player dynamics. The demand side is mostly in Germany, followed by, maybe the Netherlands and the UK. And then kind of the production side, the people that I think want to really play into it are France, Spain, Portugal, and then the UK as well. And Germany has its own production plans, but they're certainly more of a buyer than a seller at this point, or a producer. So I think that the internal domestic politics are there. Hydrogen is not the only thing when we talk about the future of European energy, but it remains the number one story.
Well, I have two ways I can attack that. So I guess I'll ask you the two-part question, and you can decide what order you want to answer it in. Number one is, so what else is on the menu for the Europeans? And then number two, you mentioned about 2030s, 2040s being when all these energy shifts really start to occur. Is that true for hydrogen in Europe? Is that something where if they really went hard at it, 27, 28, we could maybe see it? Could it even be kind of sooner? Because if they can't get it in the next couple of years, like, they're going to have some other alternative if that thing can't spin up enough. And maybe it's just LNG, and they just steal all the LNG from the rest of the developing world because they could pay more for it. But so there's a two-part question.
So, Wolf, you ended with my answer. So what's the near term is LNG. So that's, they want to be able to draw as much LNG, particularly from the United States, as they can, because it provides, the near term solution. And I find it hard to believe that those LNG relationships and contracts will end after a short window. I think that they will probably continue. So I think LNG is a healthy part of that mix in Europe. What hydrogen does is it opens up new geopolitical relationships. So, France, Italy, Germany are now working across Africa with nations that have a high potential of either solar, wind, without kind of the domestic demand, but they can build out dedicated solar and wind farms and split water into hydrogen and oxygen and sell the hydrogen to Europe. So they're really starting to look at ways of finding eager producers of green hydrogen that they can rely on for decades to come. So I think that it's really looking at who are the utility companies based in Europe, who are they building partnerships with around the world. That's kind of where you're going to find signals of the future.
It's interesting to see that the EU Mercosur free trade deal, which has been on the rocks for a while because France is concerned about agricultural competition from Brazil. But I mean, Chile is sort of this other sleeping giant, I feel like, in the hydrogen space. But forgive a dumb question. So if you're producing green hydrogen in Namibia or Chile or something like that, how do you get it from there into the European market? What does that transfer look like?
So it is, well, the upside is that hydrogen is a molecule. So it is functionally a fuel. So it's a commodity. You can make it, ship it anywhere in the world. How we're going to get it across oceans is of debate right now. We are looking at, I think, a couple different future pathways. One is converting hydrogen into ammonia. So that's nitrogen and then 3 parts hydrogen. Ammonia is a widely handled and understood industrial compound, and shipping it like LNG, it's easy, right? So ammonia is probably the pathway that I think will gain favored status in kind of short to medium term for long-term investments. And then there are people that are just looking to compress it as a gas or cryogenically freeze it as a liquid. So a couple different pathways. I don't think anyone is going to place all their bets on one particular format, but the marine shipping industry is already building out large ships and recreating infrastructure just like they did with LNG.
LNG, which was really, I mean, the first country that needed LNG was Japan. They were importing LNG before it was sort of sexy. So to your point, is Japan another one in your universe then that is focused?
They are. Yeah. So Japan right now is working with Australia, and the ammonia. There's a couple compressed gas. Like, there are a couple these are down to the level of ships. Who has the ship? So there are a couple kind of compressed, ship solution providers out there, but my take on Australia, Japan is that it's going to go ammonia. There's some cryo liquid, but I think that ammonia is going to be the Australia to Asia vector.
Not to be impolite and to ask a true believer to become an apostate on a podcast while I'm recording, but if I was going to ask you, like, if you're wrong about hydrogen, why do you think you would be wrong? Like, what would be the thing that would break your thesis on hydrogen?
It would probably be it's hard to say, because if hydrogen doesn't win, it's going to have to lose both in the vehicle electrification debate. Mm-hmm. So for trucks and ships and rail and passenger cars, the kind of lithium battery mineral solution would have to win. That's a very tall ask. But it could happen. You could just have policymakers in Europe and Americas and Asia just say, look, we're gonna push battery minerals, pure electrification, and you kind of take out hydrogen as an option. If hydrogen is going to lose in the industrial kind of pathway, it's probably going to be from a bio solution, some sort of renewable fuels or a biofuels pathway. That assumption is that traditional hydrocarbons are going to just keep getting kind of pushed to the side with policy, and over a 3 or 4 decade time period get regulated out of existence.
Mm-hmm. We're really only talking about the West though there, right? Because I don't see. I mean, China definitely has plans for how it wants to be green, but like in the meantime, like as much coal and oil and everything else that they can get their hands on, they're importing. There's not this sort of disjuncture between where they want to go and where they are now.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And Asia has always been a very isolated part of the energy conversation. Asia has never really, China in particular has produced, solar panels, but they've never really taken the reins and had a strong regional sense of their own destiny. And that could change. There could be some, geographical constraints that keep that from happening. But Asia will always kind of be, or has been, a recipient of other energy policymakers. Yeah.
Well, let's stay on this for a little bit longer before we go away, because it sounds like everything I'm hearing is that, like, I'm hearing a lot about biofuels, a lot of excitement about biofuels. And when you compare, like on a chart, the price of oil over the past 200 years to the price of, say different grains like corn or soybeans or things like that, like we have been able to drive down the cost of like grains phenomenally over centuries to where we haven't been able to do that with oil. That probably has more to do with the geopolitics and cartels and all the things that are out there setting the price of oil on grand markets. But I'm guessing that you're not moved by the idea that, hey, like, Brazil is putting on the size of Texas in terms of extra soybean production every year right now, and they want to grow even more grains. Like, why don't we use some of this stuff to try and use renewable fuels to bridge the future? You mentioned Germany. I mean, I hear nothing from Germany. You said about hydrogen. I feel like I hear nothing from Germany except e-fuels this and our car industry that, and we have to save the car industry and all like German exports and things like that. So help me make sense of sort of the broad sunlit uplands you're seeing for hydrogen in the 2030s, but these very serious challenges they're easier, they won't take as much sort of innovation to get there, and they are there in front of you. Yeah.
So, well, first, just on the oil market, I mean, we just, it's like being in a bad relationship and you just don't know what to do. And, we put up with every few years, the price of oil goes through the roof. It's just, it's really just a kind of an incumbent legacy dynamic, right? When you look at biofuels, the historical case for biofuels was always that it was a drop-in solution, right? It's just it's a chain of molecules that is close enough to oil or diesel, gas or diesel. We drop it into existing infrastructure. It fits what we need in terms of reduction of GHGs. The challenges with biofuels have not really gone away. And if you look at the industry as a whole, it remains tightly coupled to just regulation and targeted production, settings. If the United States says we need, 100 million units or 200 million units, that is what the market is going to produce. We don't see within the biofuels world natural incentives for players to just push through that wall and say, I'm not just producing for the government targets, I'm producing for a market that's going to expand and, kind of leave the house and grow up and not need these targets. So, if there were those natural incentives, you would probably be a little bit more bullish on biofuels. But it really it's just wherever you set the marker, the producers are going to hit it. And then just very quickly, because I know you'll jump in here, biofuels it's going to be hard to shake the activist attacks of food versus fuel, secondary crops, waste to fuels. Like there are solutions out there, but the perception, I think, is always going to be you are taking away farmland to produce something that is basically the same chemically as what we're currently using.
Well, I think you just hit on the real Achilles heel. In my presentations these days, I have this great map that shows you all the land that's being used for farming crops that are eaten versus, farmland that's used for crops that are being used for energy production. And there's way more, the energy production ones are purple and the food is green. There's way more purple on that map than you might have thought. And it's why I have been relatively sanguine about there are people out there saying that we're going to have global famine and that, billions of people are going to die because we're going to run out of food. To your point, if governments decide, no, we don't need the 2,000 units or whatever, what we need is to actually grow some food, and now we will require people to grow the food. Like, the acres are out there. Yes, you have to get the fertilizer. I'm not dismissing how hard it will be, and you may have a year or two, and you may have parts of the world, look at Somalia right now, that are really going to get screwed. But the amount of land that goes into just producing energy right now, and the number of countries, Indonesia and palm oil, and the US talking about soybeans, you kind of go down the list. It's I think part of it has to do with the global food system just being broken, because farmers can't get what their crops are worth, or can't get enough from growing their crops in order to make a living for themselves. But the government doesn't want to set food prices, because that gets into a whole weird thing. So they say, you can grow energy and we will set the limits here. I think you're right that that's a difficult Achilles heel for the industry, but it's also in some ways their strength, because it means they're tied to government. It means that, that they have those connections and are going to push the government to say, hey, if you go away from biofuels, you're not just screwing the oil companies, you're screwing the farmers and you're screwing the heartland. And it's a difficult argument to make.
Yeah. So I think my forecast with biofuels is it's just kind of a steady state, right? Mm-hmm. It will continue to grow slowly. It will have a future, but its future is intimately tied to, the combustion engine, the heat engine, and the politics of food that you said. So
we're going to have your friend Will Thurmond on. He emailed me over the weekend, by the way. He's going to come on. So, but before we leave energy realm and go into some other interesting things, because we had Miles on the podcast a couple weeks ago who was talking about fusion. And by the end of the podcast, I wanted to be a fusion prophet. I was like, sign me up. This sounds absolutely great. So just kind of tell me where you are with sort of nuclear in general as a futurist, and where is it in that energy mix out to the 2030s? Do you see developments there that are really promising? Do you think it doesn't scale? Are the politics of it in the West just not going to work? How do you give me your sort of 50,000 foot answer on where nuclear is?
Well, there's two sides of the nuclear story. First, just in the kind of conventional sense, there's whispers and small group chatter of a renaissance. And, we finally had in the United States regulatory approval for, a new kind of more modular reactor. There is, there are anecdotes and some evidence of private sector funding starting to go into nuclear. I would love to see it. I think it is a critical piece of the energy future. It's just going to take, I think, more of an Apollo investment model of committing, kind of 10 years, we're going to do this percentage, and it would have to be around new architecture, right? So, and then, I'm a true believer here. Nuclear to hydrogen is a very compelling story, because arguably molecules are a more profitable business, and a nuclear power plant, is high capacity factor, so you can run it kind of to its peak for a long time. But nuclear can be challenged in its integration with renewables because it's difficult to ramp up, ramp down. And now, the United States is looking seriously at integration of electrolyzers, so you can just keep those nuclear, plants running at full capacity, and whatever they're not pumping out into the grid, they convert it into hydrogen, put it into a pipeline, and send it along. So I think nuclear is strong that way. I do think that there will be a renaissance. The challenge is going to be finding Gen Z and millennials and Gen Xers to lead the way. Because if you look at the talent, people that know the industry, they're mostly boomers. And we don't have the human talent, right? That's really in Korea is where that talent is these days. And then on just the further reaches of advanced technologies, I know all the eggs are in kind of one architecture. in France. And that reactor, I think if it's going to do anything and bring a real solution, that's probably in the 2040s, 50s. And kind of the and I'm not an expert in the different model that we just had in the United States, but it's probably it's probably a 2040s, 50s thing, which is fine. We're going to keep on doubling energy. So, I don't want to dismiss it. You can embrace things that have payouts in 20, 30 years.
Yeah, but I think the point you made about the human capital aspect is so critical. It's something we've talked about on this podcast in lots of different ways. And, we got Miles on the podcast who's at MIT and doing interesting things. But I think what you're saying in some ways is we don't have enough Mileses. Like, it's nice that there's a couple guys out there at MIT, and it's nice that the United States is starting to think about this. But to your point, I mean, when you look at where new nuclear reactors are being built in the world, it's China, it's India, it's Korea to a lesser extent. Japan has its own kind of weirdness with nuclear after Fukushima in general. But we just don't have the human talent. I don't know many people in my networks. And it's funny about millennials and Gen Z. I think millennials and Gen Z are totally cool with nuclear. They don't have the sort of memory of, maybe they saw Chernobyl on HBO, but they weren't alive for Chernobyl. They don't remember 3 Mile Island. These are all trivia questions for them. So they don't have that hostility towards it. But yet, I don't know. We don't have the expertise here to do anything with it.
Yeah. So, I think it would require a kind of a top-down vision and commitment of resources.
Yeah. Okay. Well, moving a little bit further afield. What you want to go to crypto or you want to go to GPT?
Yeah, let's talk we can talk crypto. I mean, it's ever changing.
A lot has. I can't remember exactly. It was probably years ago that you came on and we were talking about Cardano, and I was using you as a soundboard for getting to know the crypto industry. A lot's happened since. Where do you think we are right now? I mean, we had Sam Bankman-Fried, who I can't stop. I can't get enough Sam Bankman-Fried. It's like watching a car wreck. I'm waiting with bated breath for every development. But tell me where you are in the crypto cycle.
Yeah. So, where are we coming from? So, crypto is. Let's say it's about 15 years old, right? Since the emergence of Bitcoin.
It's an adolescent.
Yeah, it is. And let's say that there is a strong case that large kind of technology platforms mature over 40-year cycles, right? So, it takes about 40 years for things to really mature. Crypto is absolutely an adolescence stage. Where we're coming from in this current cycle is the bull run of post-COVID stimulus, right? We all remember people are sitting at home, most people still working, and they get a check or they're not spending as much money, and crypto finds its legs and everyone buys in, and then what do you know? The industry is not ready. Its institutional supporters are not convinced, so it's not sustainable, and we crash. And we pulled back, and then Russia kind of threw an extra, wrench into the gears. But crypto for me is still on its slow and steady march forward. The case for crypto is to decentralize assets, identity, and governance. So crypto is about the development of new infrastructure for us to create cryptographically secured digital assets. Don't think US dollar, don't think loyalty points, right? Think loyalty points for your favorite brand. Think assets like your mortgage, creating new mortgage liquidity pools. The crypto asset story is not the dethroning of the US dollar. It's the securitization and the financialization of digital assets. And I think that will happen. I think that, the next phase is going to be about enterprise loyalty points. Companies are going to start to have their own cryptocurrencies. And that will not be as much of a threat to the US regulators as the idea of Bitcoin trying to dethrone the dollar or gold. But it is the next wave. And then very quickly, the decentralization of identity. This is this notion of individuals being able to control their identity. And when someone wants access to your identity, you can grant them specific access to what fields in the form they pulled from. So if you're a healthcare provider or your bank or your, whoever wants to know information about you, you can selectively control what they see. Nobody is asking for identity wallets, just like nobody was asking for a social media profile page, right? But I do think that identity-linked data is an enormous problem to solve, and I think crypto and blockchain can deliver. And then, so I'm very bullish on the next 5 to 10 years on digital identity. And then the final thing is governance, and this is the ability to use blockchain and cryptocurrency to bring more transparency, accountability, and kind of automation to decision making. So governance tools that shine the light on how organizations are run, I think will find adoption. So I think crypto, it needs to decouple from the narrative that the only thing crypto is good for is to dethrone fiat currencies, right? Once we start seeing the utility of crypto beyond that, I think you'll start to see growth. So, but I don't see kind of a bull market coming until 24 or 25. So we're still a little away.
Well, let me push on that a little bit, because it feels like in some ways you're talking about two different things. Because when you start talking about the decentralization of assets, identity, and governance, I'm nodding. I'm like, yes, that makes sense. Check. But then we immediately go to, and then it's like bull market for, I'm going to buy this Bitcoin and then it's going to go up 10x and I'm going to retire and stuff like that. So it almost seems like, are the currencies and the coins even, I could imagine those go to zero and all the things that you talked about in terms of blockchain and crypto and all that other stuff still happen. So what is the relationship between that? I want to live in the future that you're talking about, where I have control over my digital identity, versus in practice, instead of governance, we get Sam Bankman-Fried. Instead of identity wallets, we get Dogecoin. Instead, help me bridge that.
Well, there's just a lot of terrible players in the space, right? And look, if you went back to the early automobile, how many terrible shops were building unsafe cars? It's just every single new industry will have grifters and thieves. Let me kind of just pause for a second here. The philosophical debate of crypto is the decoupling of state government from currency or value, right? Mm-hmm. I'm a believer in that. I can understand why countries should control monetary policy, and I can also understand why, in the long run, just like we decoupled religion from government, that we do want to decouple that. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, right? We are not going to have a social contract revolution where we take away the state's control over money when crypto is such a mess. And crypto people have to own that, right? So the idea of getting rich quick from crypto has to go away, but you can't wish it out of existence. What are you going to tell people? Don't buy this coin? It's just, we don't have control over people's desires to get rich quick. Do I think that large liquidity pools will emerge around Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, and whoever? Absolutely, because the settlement of those assets will occur in those liquidity pools. Mm-hmm. So if you start to see, Amazon builds a Cardano-based cryptocurrency, not their own private, but they want liquidity, so they go to a large pool. Nike, Whole Foods, all these companies start to build out their own cryptocurrencies. They want liquidity across other brand loyalty points. They don't want their own. So I do think that the value of those coins will go up, but they shouldn't go up like a ladder. It should just be very slow going. But that's wishful thinking, because you can't stop people from being greedy.
Yeah, unless you're in China, where you can say you may now not
Yep.
own Bitcoins,
Yep.
and there's a nice
Yep.
gulag waiting for you in
Yep.
Xinjiang if you do.
Yep.
Um,
So I don't know. We'll see. But I do believe in it. I do believe crypto. We're just in a, we're where we need to be.
well,
Just growing up.
how does that shift happen though? So like if Delta says Sky Miles is now on a blockchain or something like that, is that Delta starts building its own blockchain backed like loyalty program? Is that it goes on an Ethereum network or?
Yeah. So this is the stage of enterprise crypto, right? So you have you onboard hundreds of thousands, millions of people overnight. I don't think that these large companies are going to create their own blockchains. They might create what are called side chains, but they will not. They're not in the business of creating cryptocurrencies, right? They will likely join one of the large platforms, and I would say Ethereum, Cardano, Avalanche, Polkadot, who knows what it is, because of the liquidity. So Delta will want its programmable currency to be interchangeable with, Kellogg's and Kraft's. Like they're going to want, or the Hilton. They will want that interoperability. They don't want to be in the business of creating their own blockchain, right? Now, do they know that? They're probably going to say at first, I want my own controllable Delta currency. But it's, once they get through a couple meetings, I think that the leaders will understand the benefits of being a part of a broader liquidity pool.
Yeah, you can see brands starting to do this, I guess. I mean, I hate that, Uber Cash wants me to create Uber Cash every time I want to take an Uber rather than like my credit card's in the system. Like, why do I need this Uber Cash thing? But it sort of is what you're talking about in a very, I guess, unsophisticated way, right?
Yeah. It's the use case is the programmability of currency. Mm-hmm. And what crypto does is it allows you to program in rewards or disincentives based off of behaviors and decisions. So if I can incentivize my customers to do certain things, that's good for my business. And where does it start? It's probably not with Delta or Hilton. It's probably with Mr. Beast. Mm-hmm. So my kids right now are going through. There's this drink called Prime. Have you heard of Prime?
Mm-mm.
You're an old man.
I was born an old man, Gary.
So Prime is by one of the. There's like a YouTube guy and then a boxer YouTube, Logan Paul or Paul Logan, one of these guys.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And the boxer created this drink called Prime. And it's just water with vitamins and minerals. That's all it is. And they are selling out. And they're really hard to get. And I tell my kids, they're intentionally having low production so the product will sell out. So everyone will want it. It's just the Beanie Babies or Cabbage Patch Kids. So my kids are so devoted to this Prime drink that, a cryptocurrency NFT to reward the people that buy Prime. And then when the new batch comes out, you show me your NFT that showed you bought it last time, you're going to get first dibs. And I show my NFT and then I get access earlier than everyone else. Like that's a no-brainer. And that's coming from creators. Yeah. Not from big corporations. So I think the creator economy is probably where this starts to emerge.
Well, it sounds like I need to create my own sparkling water brand, sort of Shap water or something, and we can issue Shap tokens, and I can see it. I can see my empire building in front of me. It's funny when you were talking about it a little bit. It also reminds me. In high school, I lived on a kibbutz for like a month in Israel, and most of the kibbutzim are gone or are dying slowly because they were in a very specific political social context, and they really were these sort of idealistic communes. But then as Israel gets more capitalist, and anyway, we don't have to go down the kibbutz rabbit hole. But you were talking, I do remember when I got on kibbutz, it was like you were given a certain number of like paper tokens, like there were little tickets that you would get at a raffle, and you could go to the kibbutz store and exchange it for, a candy bar or something like that, because everybody ate the same thing. You couldn't, but there was this one place where you could use this fake kibbutz money to like buy things. I don't know if there's another use case, but that's an interesting kind of model for what you're talking about, like a community. I'm sure Elon Musk is thinking about Musk money in his new stupid town that he's building in Texas. But before I let you leave crypto, you talked about the geography of energy and specifically hydrogen being Europe. Is there a similar conversation about crypto in general? Because El Salvador has made waves about they're using Bitcoin, but I think that has a lot more to do with, state capture of sort of capital flows there and dependence on the dollar. Like, are there any countries that have that mix between, enough rule of law, enough institutional integrity, plus a need for the types of things that you're talking about, where you get a center of gravity? Or is it really just diffuse and decentralized, and it's its own geography in a sort of digital world?
It is. It's its own geography, and it really right now it's just all eyes are on the United States, right? All eyes are on what is Gary Gensler going to do with crypto, good and bad, whether we like it or not. We need regulatory certainty, and then most likely the world's regulators will follow what the U.S. does. Maybe a little harsher, a little easier to kind of distinguish their market, but we're waiting on the U.S. There are a few places that have some kind of, what you would perceive to be pro-crypto, regulations, or they don't tax your crypto earnings. But even that goes away. Portugal is one, and they kind of pulled back. Puerto Rico did it, and then they're like, "Oh, we don't want these people coming here as much." So it's surface level. It's all eyes on the United States right now. So, and they're going for exchanges, right? So Sam Bankman-Fried, that was a centralized corruption play. It had nothing to do with crypto. But from the perspective of my mom and dad, it was a crypto scam.
Well, it's so poetic that he took like the thing that is supposed to lead to decentralization, centralized it, and then like ran a fraud off of it. It's just like
yeah. So that was a centralized play.
In some ways, like Sam Bankman-Fried is, you talked about assets, identity, and governance. Sam Bankman-Fried is the shining example for why you could use blockchain for governance, because if you could actually program the thing in such a way that somebody can't monkey around with it, like then you won't have Sam Bankman-Fried. It's a way to try and insulate yourself from the grifters. But
100%.
I consider myself an optimist, but that's even a bridge too far for me. The cynic in me is like, they'll find a way to break it, or whoever there'll be some back alley switch that I won't know about, and then all my money will be lost. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be, right? But they're, as a result of that whole debacle, they're going to exchanges, and regulation around exchanges is the first wave, and then after that, it's likely to be wallets, where people custody and hold their crypto is in a wallet. So, we're still some time away, but I still believe in Cardano. I still believe in Ergo. I still believe in, a few of these projects will shine more brightly than others. So, not financial advice.
No financial advice here. All right. Well, we're going in descending order from things I have knowledge about. I'm dangerous when it comes to energy. I know something about crypto. I really don't know much about AI GPT in particular. So why don't we just, for the listeners, I will play the role of the listener who doesn't know anything about this. What is GPT? Why should I care?
Yeah. So ChatGPT is the product, right? It's the MySpace. It's a product that is what's called a large language model in the world of generative AI. So let's just pause for a second. AI, when it kind of, got its wings a few years ago, mostly through like IBM Watson and things like that, was a big data analytical play. The function of AI was to see large volumes of information and data and basically find patterns, find outliers. AI was analytics.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It interpreted things and spit out an output. Your brain couldn't compute. Generative AI is the use of AI to create something that doesn't exist, to create something entirely new. So we can have generative AI for text. So ChatGPT is a text output product where you can type in, write me a poem about Jacob and Garry, walking around the streets of New Orleans with their dog. Write me a song about something. Whatever it is, you're generating something new. Write me a healthcare plan. Write me a plan to lose 10 pounds. What is the difference between renewable diesel and biodiesel? You can ask it questions. Like ChatGPT is amazing. It is flawed. And if you choose to find the areas of weakness and focus on what ChatGPT is not currently good at, you can get very dismissive of ChatGPT. But if you just use it as an everyday person, it blows your mind consistently. It is so good. And what ChatGPT has done is basically taken large corpuses of text, and then humans have trained it to make connections. So, you say the word Chicago, it's connected to Bulls, White Sox, pizza. You change the prompt, you say Chicago Bulls, then the new path lights up. Chicago Bulls is connected to Michael Jordan, etc. So all it's doing is predicting the next word, and it does it really well. So that's generative text. Then there's generative visuals. I can say to a generative AI application, DALL-E is an example, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney are products. I can say, create me an image of a cowboy riding a horse on the moon. And seconds later, that image appears. There are generative video applications where I can say, create me a 30-second video of a mom and her daughter walking through a cornfield talking about the future of ethanol. And it creates the video. I can say, create me a virtual world, and it creates the virtual world. I can say, create me a conversation between one that exists, Steve Jobs and Joe Rogan. And then it creates a fake. So it's generative AI. The story is not ChatGPT. The story is human beings having tools that can create things that don't exist, that inspire us, that educate us, that challenge different perspectives, or it can be used to create propaganda and misinformation and crappy content. Like, it can be used for both.
How long do I have in my career then? Like, at what point will you be able to go to generative AI and say, like, give me a geopolitical analysis of the Vietnamese political transition? Like, are we that close?
Oh, man. No, but yes. The question is, and this is a trope, but it's very important. AI is not going to replace humans. AI is going to replace humans that do not work with AI. So geopolitical analysts that work with AI will displace human-only geopolitical strategists, unless they've got a big YouTube channel and they're just entertainers, right?
Yeah, unless they've predicted the end of the world, in which case.
Yeah, can name a few. So you are going to be working with AI. Lawyers, right? Lawyers working with legal large language models, not ChatGPT, but domain-specific large language models based off of law. Those lawyers will displace lawyers that don't. Doctors that work with medical generative AI will displace those that don't. Illustrators, like it's a future where we will have more of our creative and analytical processes facilitated by AI. That's the narrative. It's not humans get replaced.
No, I see what you mean. It's humans who won't adapt, get replaced. How the sort of second sort of, and this may be a simplistic or even a dumb question, but at what point do we go from generating a video or a conversation or content to like, hey, AI, make me a car? like use a 3D printer to create some object for me that I've asked for. I mean, obviously, like you need all the materials. I don't know. Like, is that in the conversation, or am I way ahead?
That's way ahead. That's generative design, and you will have people. This happens now. Create me a structure that can support 5,000 pounds, and the structure is made out of aluminum. And generative design ends up creating something that no human mind would do. It's this webbed thing, and it's like, and that gets 3D printed. That's, from a novelty perspective, that is probably just a few years away from, there are companies that create generatively designed objects for the real world, 10, 15, 20 years, Is it structural design or is it a product? Like, what's the safety risk profile? But I think that it's a reverse thing where people are using generative AI to create new interior decorating ideas, and they're coming up with these crazy like biomorphic shapes. So what I think is going to happen is people are going to start creating these visuals of like their kitchen being redone or their new bedroom, and it's going to have this beautiful, artistic, very highbrow form factor. And then the manufacturers are going to say, this is an opportunity. This is the opportunity.
I can also now see why. I mean, I already was with you on sort of the decentralization of identity and identity wallets and things like that. But in a world where like AI is producing all of this content out there, it sort of makes sense to me that like you would want some kind of marker or symbol that was like, no, this came from Jacob Shapiro, or this that kind of brings it home.
Yeah.
Anything else before we? I mean, that was that was just a little teaser. We'll do
regulatory of generative AI is the conversation of like 2025. What happens when teenagers start to have relationships with generative AI agents? And, you hear a story of a generative AI that, quote unquote, hallucinated and told the kid to do something and led to something horrible happen. Regulatory oversight of AI outputs is going to happen, and the models will have regulatory oversight. So there's going to be lots of in the weeds conversations. And then the final note here is the end game for all of this is what we call multimodal AI. The story is not creating an image, creating a video, creating text. The story is, if I want to go from image to text to image to image, video to text, it's multimodal. So if I want my phone camera to watch me doing yoga and then have the yoga, AI app tell me, how to change my positions, that's multimodal.
All right. Well, as I said, I'm a novice here, but as usual with our conversations, I gained perspective, and also I gained a laundry list of things I need to do homework about. So I hope you'll come back in a couple months, and I'll be a more worthy interlocutor on ChatGPT. But you've convinced me that I need to pay attention and not dismiss it.
Yes.
Garry, man, it's always good to see you. Hope you'll be in New Orleans in July. Maybe we'll do this in person in July, and then have some beignets or some sazeracs or both at the same time. I don't know.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur.